afternoon, everyone on the East Coast. Good morning, everybody else. I'm here today with Hamster Brady, and we are continuing our research project into secret societies. What do you have for us today?
We are doing part 2 of Scroll and Key, Yale's second most renowned secret society. And it's going to get a little more fun this week. Shall we jump in? Notice I'm wearing a sweatshirt. It's getting cold here fast. It's August, and I got a sweatshirt on.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
Yeah, I'll survive. All right, let's jump in. I'm going to share my screen because we got a lot to get to today. We left off last week. We talked about how Scroll and Key was founded by a bunch of people that seemed to be very academic minded, and they did not like the way Skull and Bones was selecting their members. Skull and Bones seemed to care a lot more about bloodlines than they did about any academic achievement, although they do have some pretty good scholars coming out of Skull and Bones. We'll give them credit. Scroll and Key initially started out as it seemed to be a pretty pure academic organization. And then it changed, and they built the tomb. And they got the most world-renowned architect in the world who builds all these mansions in Newport, Rhode Island, to build a campus tomb. And they didn't have that much money. So the question, of course, is where did that money come from? And did Scroll and Key change its good ways into something a little more nefarious? And as we go along today, you're going to see that subtle change happening right in front of us. Fair enough?
Yes.
So with no further ado, those are our founders. There's their 1850s. Not much happens in Scroll and Key in the 1860s. So you got one guy gets a mention in Wikipedia, and he's a congressman that did nothing of note. But then we get to the 1870s, and we get some fun people. Go a little bit bigger there. Okay. This guy by the name of George Bird Grinnell. Now, if parents naming their kids has any kind of prophecy to it, this guy is one of the examples of that. The middle name like Bird. What did he do? Some people may have heard of him. Born in 1849 in Brooklyn, New York. And I'm going to go a little bit quickly on these early guys because the second part of the show is going to be really, I'm going to have some mic drops to finish it off. So I want to get to that pretty quickly.
Okay.
Grinnell was born in 1849 in Brooklyn, New York. Moves to a place called Audubon Park in Washington Heights. That's developed from the estate of the famous ornithologist John James Audubon, namesake of the Audubon Society. And this guy's middle name is Bird. That's right. A little bit prophetic. Famous book by Audubon was The Birds of America. So Grinnell gets done at Yale and becomes an explorer and a conservationist. Not really a deep state type, huh?
Well, from my perspective, the conservationists are the most nefarious with the World Wildlife Foundation and stuff. So I'm kind of jaded. I'll let you unfold the story.
No, hold that thought, because that's going to come up again later. And of course, some of these explorers are out there looking for mineral exploitation, etc., but maybe not.
Exactly.
So in 1870, with a guy he goes out with the Peabody Museum to collect vertebrate fossils in the West for 6 months. And he took part in the last great hunt of the Pawnee Indians in 1872. 1874, he's on General Custer's Black Hills expedition, but he did miss the 1876 Little Bighorn disaster. 1875, with a guy by the name of Colonel William Ludlow, he explores the newly established Yellowstone Park. If anybody is familiar with the name Colonel William Ludlow, that was the guy from Legends of the Fall, one of my favorite movies. And I was a real life guy in Montana. So 1880s and 90s, he makes many trips to Glacial National Park. And here we start getting connections to some of our deep state actors. In 1899, he joins E.H. Harriman's expedition of the Alaskan coast. Harriman, of course, is looking for oil. 1880 to 1911, he's the editor and president of the periodical Forest and Stream, which I believe is still with us today. So he's rubbing elbows with some pretty big names.
Right.
1887, with Teddy Roosevelt, he helps found what's called the Boone and Crockett Club, which is dedicated to the restoration of America's wildlands. We're going to do the Roosevelts here in a couple of weeks or maybe sooner. So I'm going to leave that alone about Roosevelt being a conservationist. And of course, George Bird Grinnell organizes the very first Audubon Society. He was appalled by the negligent mass slaughter of birds. Now there's over 500 Audubon societies. Interesting. If you look at who the Audubon medals have been given out to, that's a outstanding achievement in conservation and environmental protection. Nice little who's who list coming here. 1950, John D. Rockefeller Jr. 1955, Walt Disney. 1964, Lawrence Rockefeller. 1975, one of my favorite arch villains, Maurice Strong, the guy who started the entire climate change movement at the United Nations. 1989, Robert Redford. 1991, Ted Turner. 1992, Skull and Bones alumni John Chafee, who we featured just a few weeks ago. Son's still in Congress. 94 is Jimmy Carter. And 2005, they give the Audubon medal to the entire Rockefeller family.
Holy crap.
Yeah, you know how I say all this conservation stuff and all this environmental stuff is just an excuse to implement the one world government, and how the Rockefellers are behind all of that?
Yes.
Yeah. Does that connect a few dots?
It does. And it's consistent with my research.
Mm-hmm. All roads lead to the Rockefellers. In 1894, National Park Protective Act gave the remaining 200 wild buffalo in Yellowstone protection, and Grinnell's behind this. 1982, the population of buffaloes was dropped down to 23, and Grinnell goes out there and finds additional animals in the world, and now the herd became viable. So, good job. Protected the buffalo. And he would write several books about Plains Indian cultures. So does he still fit our mold of just being a pure academic that may be rubbing elbows in some circles?
No.
We shall see. Okay. Next guy we're going to get to. Guy with the name of Edward Salisbury Dana. Let's get his whole bio in there. He's class of 1870 as well. Why do we care about him? He's born in 1849, New Haven, Connecticut. His father was a geologist and mineralogist, a guy by the name of James Dwight Dana. And Edward would also become a mineralogist and a physicist. After Yale, he spent 2 years with George J. Brush at the Sheffield Scientific School. Didn't you have something to say about Sheffield last week?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
That, gosh. Yeah. If you guys didn't watch the show last week, go watch the show. Because Sheffield Scientific School, in my opinion, is very nefarious.
Did you know Sheffield has its own secret societies? They had, well, it's interesting. They had the Colony Club, which is now called Berzelius. They had what was called the Cloister, which is now called, you've heard of this one, Book and Snake. They had St. Elmo, whose most famous alumni is one Ron DeSantis. Those are secret societies at Sheffield. You want to add anything on Sheffield before I go on?
No. Yeah, it's covered last week if you didn't watch the show.
Okay. Dana then studies abroad in Heidelberg and Vienna, and he specialized in crystal optics and crystallography, studying the science of crystals, which is interesting. Comes back to Yale for his MA and PhD, becomes a professor of natural philosophy, astronomy, and physics at Yale. He's the editor and director for the American Journal of Sciences for 50 years until 1926. He's at the National Academy of Sciences in 1884. He's a trustee of the Peabody Museum of Yale. He's an elected member of scientific societies around the world and has published several important mineralogy textbooks. And that's all we have on Mr. Dana. If it wasn't for that Sheffield connection and scrolling key, I would think that this guy is just a academic.
But obviously, yeah, the connection for me is the mineral part of it, because those are the people that were sent out on scouting expeditions all over the world to find precious minerals.
Yeah. Interesting enough, neither of these two gentlemen really come from any famous bloodlines, so I didn't get into who their father or the families and parents were. Nothing too exciting. These are people who came from upper middle class families and were good students. Okay, moving on. Mr. Fred Du Bois. Great mustache there. Du Bois, class of 1872. Why do we care about Fred? Well, he was a two-term U.S. senator. He was born in 1851 in Palestine, Illinois. He's from French-Canadian descent. His grandfather was a guy by the name of Toussaint Du Bois. I don't know if it's pronounced Dubois or not. Well, his grandfather was an immigrant who fought bravely at the Battle of Tippecanoe. It's a pretty good way to become a citizen.
Yeah.
His father, James Kilgore Du Bois, I think I'm going to call it, was an official at the U.S. Land Office. U.S. Land Office in Illinois. Think about this, where they're basically pushing people off their lands so they can put in the Transcontinental Railroad, working right next to all the railroad lawyers, who are some of the most corrupt people on the planet. That's what his father is doing. His father is an early supporter of the Republican Party and a very close friend of railroad lawyer Abraham Lincoln. And he becomes an Illinois senator, state senator, and moves the family to Springfield. So Du Bois got a few connections.
He does.
He goes to Yale, but he's still not what you would call blue blood.
Correct.
He's blue blood adjacent.
Correct.
Goes to Yale, 1870 to 72. Gets involved in some small businesses till 75. Then he gets in 1875. He gets appointed to the Board of Railroad and Warehouse Commissioners of Illinois. It's another one of those bottleneck positions, funneling which direction the money's going to go. Remember, at this point in time, Lincoln's won the war. The Republican Party's got their federally funded internal improvements, which basically means the government is giving all kinds of subsidies to people making the steel, people making the railroads, the land. The government's buying land for the railroad. It's the easiest way to become a robber baron, is to have the government paying for all of your overhead costs. And you have to have all these bottleneck positions directing the money, because a lot of people have their hand out. Greatest fortunes in human history are made in this time period. So his father dies. He takes off in 1880 and moves to the Idaho Territory with his brother, Dr. Jesse Du Bois Jr. He then becomes a U.S. Marshal for the Idaho Territory, which is probably why he adopted the Wyatt Earp look. He led a... What's that?
I said, that's interesting.
Yeah. So he leads, this is funny, a successful campaign to disenfranchise Mormon voters due to polygamy. He was anti-Mormon. 1886, he becomes a Republican congressional delegate from the territory, and he's there lobbying for Idaho statehood. The president at the time is a guy by the name of President Benjamin Harrison. Well, his grandfather was President William Henry Harrison, who was at the Battle of Tippecanoe. So we have a family connection to these guys, and he's there in D.C., and he actually gets Harrison to sign the act on July 3rd as opposed to July 4th, a day early, because that's when they put the new star on the flag, is always 4th of July. They didn't want to wait a year. Harrison did that as a favor. We get to 1890. He is a U.S. Senator from Idaho. He's a huge supporter of tariffs. These are protective tariffs, basically protecting the robber barons from competition. This is a very corrupt practice. Same thing Hamilton pushed for. Same thing Lincoln and the Republicans pushed for. He's also, in 1896, part of what's called the Silver Republican faction. At the time, there's a huge political issue called free silver. They have a couple of congressional acts, 1853 and 73, had made silver no longer a currency. There's a lot of, the gold standard was it, but a lot of people thought that silver for the currency would spread more cash and help the smaller individual. It was a big populist issue. That's how William Jennings Bryan took leadership of the Democrat Party and ran for president twice. Had this famous Cross of Gold speech, which we should go over sometime. It's too long to do today. But free silver movement's a big deal. Leads to the Greenback Party, all that. It's a big deal. Anyways, he supports that and loses his re-election in 1897. But in 1900, he decides to return to the Senate, but this time as a Democrat. I think he's one of only 3 men in history to serve in the Senate as both a Democrat and a Republican.
That's interesting.
Mm-hmm. And it was all about the silver, because that was William Jennings Bryan was a populist, and he was all about the free silver, and this was a big issue for Du Bois. When you're out west, you want silver to be a coin, be currency. You want to get away from the New York banks and the bullion banks. So here's where it gets fun. In the Senate, after the Spanish-American War, he's opposing efforts to make the Philippines an American territory. He goes and visits and says the following. He basically declares that Filipinos could not rule themselves and advocated selling the islands to Japan to rule over them. His quote, "Filipinos and Hawaiians will not labor. They are very similar to our American Negro."
Holy shit.
He then breaks with Democrats and supports Teddy Roosevelt's agenda of environmental conservatism. Conservationism. He would support William. We've got to talk about the Roosevelts and conservationism next couple of weeks. So we'll do that. I'll cue that up for us.
Okay.
Yeah. Then would support William Randolph Hearst in his 1904 presidential bid, which failed. He lost his re-election in 1907, spent the rest of his life in D.C., not doing much. He did work with the Woodrow Wilson campaigns in 1912 and 1916, and he would die in 1930. But that's a pretty darn interesting life, don't you think?
Yeah, and people need to understand, if you're not familiar with William Randolph Hearst, he kind of was the beginning of the Mockingbird media.
Yeah, they called it yellow journalism at the time.
Yeah, so that's very nefarious.
Okay, enough about Fred. Here we have another fun guy by the name of Henry DeForest. Now I'll get into a little bit of blue blood territory, because he's born in 1855 in New York City, and he's the descendant of wealthy French Huguenot ancestors, one of which is a guy by the name of Jesse DeForest. He is one of the founders of the Dutch West India Company, which is in existence from 1621 to 1792. It was given a charter for trade monopoly on the Dutch West Indies, basically the Caribbean, which basically gave them jurisdiction over the Dutch Atlantic slave trade and piracy. The company failed at conquest. And, like the Spanish would go and conquer, These guys didn't do that as well. So they changed their tune to pursue the plunder of shipping, basically piracy. They would take down the Spanish silver fleet, just captured it, all the silver coming back from South America. They would capture sugar shipments from Brazil. That was the Dutch West India Company, basically a corporate sanctioned group of pirates. Made a lot of money.
Version of piracy.
Yes. Remember we say that we are ruled by pirates? Most of American fortunes are built on smuggling and piracy.
Yep.
There's something called the crisis of 1772, caused all the plantations in the Caribbean to fail. The company kept losing money. None of them can afford to buy any slaves anymore. And the Dutch West India Company goes under, never paid another dividend. So Jesse DeForest would then come to America and help settle something called New Amsterdam. Y'all might know that as Manhattan. The English traded Manhattan, got Manhattan from the Dutch for an island off of Indonesia so the Dutch could have a complete monopoly on a couple of spices. I think the English got the better part of the deal. More ancestors for him. His maternal grandfather was a guy by the name of Robert Doughty Weeks, who was, of course, the very first president of the New York Stock Exchange. Weeks' son, John Abiel Weeks, married a woman named Alice Hathaway Delano, who is a distant cousin of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. How did the Delanos make their money? Piracy, opium. All right, so this guy comes from some interesting bloodlines. Agreed?
Yes.
His brother, Robert Weeks DeForest, was a lawyer, financier, and philanthropist. These guys are coming of age right in the middle of the Gilded Age, and philanthropy is basically how you get social status, and a lot of big deals are done there, and this is how the whole great society game is played. That's what philanthropy is all about. You want to move up in status, you give to charities. What have their charities turned into? Oh, I don't know, government-sponsored money laundering operations so that you can, under the guise of charity, exert your will on an international scale so your multinational corporations can exploit resources with the help of NGOs, etc.
That's a very concise way of saying it.
Thank you. All right, so Robert DeWeeks, his brother, goes to Yale, 1870, Columbia Law School, General Counsel of Central Railroad of New Jersey, where he became the VP in 1902. More railroad barons, right?
Yep.
He was a longtime president of something called the Hackensack Water Company, which is just a utility. And he made pretty good money there. 1901, a guy by the name of, Teddy Roosevelt appoints him to the State Tenement House Commission. Tenement housing acts, there's been a few of them. This is the Tenement House Act of 1901. This made it so that every single house had to have an outward-facing window. Changed all the construction in New York, and that's how you got all these courtyards in the middle of the buildings. That's what that's all about. He had interests in multiple charities, the National Conference of Charities and Correction. He was, of course, a trustee of the Metropolitan Museum, and he was succeeded as he succeeded J.P. Morgan as the president of the Metropolitan Museum. So that's some pretty stuffy company.
Yeah.
He belongs to several private clubs in the Northeast. That was a big deal. There's something called Century. There's one called University. There's one I've run into before called Grolier, which is a bunch of bibliophiles. It's a book club. He's a member of New York's Siwaka Yacht Club. And that's would have been the competitor of the Newport Yacht Club. Interesting thing about that yacht club, yacht clubs have what they call a commodore. That's like the person who's in charge of the yacht club, the chairman, whatever. And the Siwanhaka Yacht Club Had some pretty famous Commodores. How about 1 Morgan, 2 Vanderbilts, oh, and 3 Roosevelts. And of course, he was a member of a swanky club you might have heard of known as Jekyll Island, Georgia.
Yes, I've definitely heard of that and been there and saw it.
Okay, so back to Henry. Like his brother, he goes to Columbia Law, practices law with his brother, father, and uncle in New York. Is chairman of the executive committee of Southern Pacific Railroad, and then becomes chairman of the board in 1929 of Southern Pacific Railroad. Then, in his role as a lawyer, he helps E.H. Harriman, Bonesman, with the recapitalization of Wells Fargo Bank. He's the longtime director of something called the Equitable Life Assurance Company. The other major shareholder of the private stock was none other than Elihu Root.
Wow.
Who's Root? Teddy Roosevelt's Secretary of State, the first head of the Carnegie Endowment for International War, and the U.S. Secretary of War from 1899 to 1904. That Elihu Root is his business partner.
Wow.
Small world, huh?
Very small world.
And to top him off, he's the president of the New York Botanical Garden from 1928 to 1937, because of course you have to be in society. You've got to sit on these boards. These are the boring parts of today. All right, now we're going to get to a guy by the name of William Colgate. Oh, this is Gilbert Colgate, is the scrolling key guy. We can't find a picture of him, so I brought in his grandfather, William Colgate. It's a portrait of him. That's the founder of Colgate, which became Colgate-Palmolive. That's the family fortune. But Gilbert's worth mentioning. Born in 1899. That can't be right. He's born in New York City, because maybe I got the year wrong. Maybe he died in 1899. Who knows? He's famous for being an Olympic bobsledder who got a bronze medal in I got some of this wrong. We're going to skip over him just because he's a Colgate. It's the only reason I mentioned. Oh, but I will say that the Colgate family was one of the founders of Planned Parenthood because they were concerned about the population explosion. So that's the Colgate. This reason there.
Yeah, I think you're talking about Junior, that was born.
I might have mixed the bios.
99. Yeah.
Yep, I could have missed. I'm looking at the dates here. I think I mixed the two bios.
Yeah.
They weren't that exciting anyway. Next, we have a George Edward Vincent, class of 1885. He's got a nice scowl. Nothing too exciting here. Born in 1864, Rockford, Illinois. His father's a bishop. He's an academic. He's associated with what's called the Chautauqua system. It's about adult education and social movement. You see a lot of this coming from the Fabian socialists in this time period. We could probably, Chautauqua is interesting and it's important and influential, but it's not very exciting and it's not really on topic for what we do. So I don't want to dive into it too much. He gets in 1892, gets a fellowship at the University of Chicago, joins the faculty in 1894, and becomes a professor of sociology in 1904. So nothing special about him so far until 1911. He becomes the third president of the University of Minnesota. He is a socialist. And then out of nowhere, 1917, Mr. Vincent becomes the president of the Rockefeller Foundation. Now, where did that come from with that bio?
So let me just say this, because this is kind of a common theme in the Fabian Society, which you just mentioned. The sociology is the study of human behavior. And I certainly didn't appreciate the kind of the Tavistock aspect of all of this until I started doing this research. So this guy embodies that. So
yeah, I had a social sciences minor in college, so I ran into this stuff really early before I got into real deep research. So it made perfect sense to me,
yeah,
right away. But yeah, there is
because
something to it.
it's about the control of human behavior. They're not
Yeah,
interested in it to improve people's lives. They're in it for control.
yeah. You look at the work of people like Cecil Rhodes and the Fabian Society, Tavistock Social Engineering. Um, and these are the people that control what gets taught at the universities, and that's why we talk about the control of the institutions is so important, and it really is about controlling human population.
Well, and interestingly enough, it says he's at the University of Chicago, which is what gave us all of the economists that went down during Operation Condor and controlled all of the people via their economies in Latin America. So it makes perfect sense if you look at it in the long run.
Yeah, and that's where John Maynard Keynes and the Keynesian school of thought, which basically is
Exactly.
printing money. And we should probably repoint out that Skull and Bones alumni Austin Goolsbee comes from University of Chicago.
Exactly.
That would have been Obama's economic advisor.
Correct.
Okay,
All
moving
about
on.
controlling people.
Class of 1889, we got a James Gamble Rogers. I think his middle name is Prophecy. You never know. He's born 1867 in Bryan Station, Kentucky. He writes for the Yale Record, goes to Scroll and Key. This guy's an architect who's responsible for the Gothic revival structures at Yale. He also developed buildings at Columbia and Northwestern. He's a very prominent architect. I'm not going to give you a tour through all his architecture like we did for Mr. Hunt last week, but he's a very, very, very famous architect. His sponsor for most of his work was a guy, a philanthropist known as Edward Harkness. Harkness inherited a fortune from his father. His father's an early investor in Standard Oil alongside Rockefeller.
Yeah, I've come across him because Harkness at one point was part of their name.
Indeed. In 1918, Mr. Harkness was the 6th richest person in the U.S. by Forbes magazine. And the list of people ahead of him is interesting because every single one of them, well, I'll just go through the list and you tell me what they have in common. John D. Rockefeller, Henry Clay Frick, a Rockefeller partner, or a Carnegie partner, Andrew Carnegie, guy by the name of George Fisher Baker, made his money in railroads and banking, and of course, William Rockefeller. Those are the only people richer than Harkness. But what's interesting, Harkness was an alumni of Yale's Wolf's Head. And despite sponsoring Rogers for all these other buildings, he chose another architect to build the new home for Wolf's Head. And I think it's because he was in Scroll and Key, and he didn't want him to see the secrets.
That's interesting.
Yeah. It's funny I can find these tidbits.
Yeah.
You got to get outside of Wikipedia to do that.
Well, you have to get, but you have to separate them from the quote unquote secrets in order to be able to ensure that you can control what you're producing.
Indeed. All right, let's get to the 1890s. That's where the fun stuff starts. So you sort of starting to see the pattern. All these academics they're starting to rub elbows with some of the real powerful people.
Yeah.
But there's still a really strong academic aspect to Scroll and Key, without a doubt. Their emphasis on who they recruit, they are looking for great students and brilliant minds. Any comments worth looking at?
Nope.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it's going to get fun. Mr. Harvey William Cushing Scroll and Key, class of 1891. He is known as the father of brain surgery. Born in 1869, Cleveland, Ohio, his father was a fourth-generation physician descended from 17th century Puritans. 1895, Cushing gets his medical degree from Harvard Medical School, interns at Mass General, does a residency at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. It's a pretty good resume for a doctor so far, yeah?
Yeah.
At 32 years old, he becomes the associate professor of surgery at Johns Hopkins.
Wow.
And then he becomes a professor of surgery at Harvard Medical School. World War I comes out, he joins the Army Medical Corps. Now, he is working on using magnets and other things to help get shrapnel out of brains and stuff like that. So he's pretty darn valuable in World War I. Fun little side note on him. He marries his Cleveland childhood friend, a woman named Catherine Stone Crowell. They have 5 children. 3 of them are daughters, and they are known in society as the Cushing sisters. And this is one heck of a resume. The oldest of them is a Mary Benedict Minnie Cushing. Of course, she married one Vincent Astor, the eldest son of John Jacob Astor IV, who died in the Titanic.
Of course.
And then she marries James Whitney from the Whitney family, Fosburgh, who's a famous painter and art collector. So these two are known for their art collections. That's daughter number 1. She marries pretty well, wouldn't you say?
Yes.
Well, we're not done yet. Next daughter is a Betsy Cushing. She marries someone by the name of James Roosevelt, eldest son of FDR.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, yeah. And then she marries someone by the name of John Hay Whitney, who we've talked about before. Because he went to Groton. He went to the Groton School, and we'll later find out he was in Scroll and Key.
Oh my gosh.
Uh-huh. Want to hear about the third daughter?
Yes.
Barbara Babe Cushing. She marries someone by the name of Stanley Grafton Mortimer. Yeah, that's that Mortimer family, one of the famous 400 that Mrs. Astor, the 400 people that could come to her parties on the list of, yeah, that's who she married into. Mortimer, of course, was the director of advertising for something called Trans World Airlines and Pan American World Airways.
CIA.
Yes, before there was a CIA.
Correct.
Oh, and of course, she has one other husband, a guy by the name of William S. Paley. He's the guy who built CBS from just a regional bunch of stations to the national powerhouse. And in World War II, he would go on to become the director of radio operations of Psychological Warfare Branch in the Office of War Information at Allied Force HQ in London.
CIA. CBS, one of the people that were identified later on, obviously, in the Mockingbird media, but it had always been part of that. And obviously, it stems from William Paley. His name came up repeatedly.
Yeah, so Mr. Cushing, just a great academic, brilliant doctor, father of brain surgery, gets to be part of society, and his daughters take the ball and run with it. And I guess that's how it's done. Next, we have a Frank Lyon Polk.
Okay.
He's born in 1871 in New York City. He's the son of a guy by the name of Mecklenburg Polk, who's the dean of the Cornell Medical School.
Well, and just in case you guys aren't putting 2 and 2 together, these medical people are in medicine around the time that Rockefeller basically takes over medicine. So this is a very important theme going on here.
Before I jump into Polk's bio, I'm going to do something here real quick. So the next guy we're going to look at is a guy by the name of Alan Wardwell. We've heard Polk and Wardwell before. When we talked about Skull and Bones, about Davis, Polk, and Wardwell, one of the most famous law firms in American history. And just a few alumni we had with the Skull and Bones that are affiliated with this was a guy by the name of Samuel Howard Gillespie Jr., who was a lawyer for Polk and argued the Erie Railroad versus Tompkins case. We had, who else did we mention here? Oh, yeah. Davis Polk would employ a guy by the name of Charles Spofford, who worked directly for Stephen Schwarzman, founder of Blackstone. We had Charles Melville Spofford again. Anyways, the Skull and Bones is all over Polk, and that's why we talked about it before. So this is the law firm. These are two classmates 1 year apart that founded this, or were two of the three names on there. And we're going to get into that, this law firm. That's how we're going to finish today. But let's talk about Polk's background.
Okay.
He's the grandson and bishop grandson of a guy who's a bishop and a Confederate general by the name of Leonidas Polk, who happens to be a cousin of U.S. President James Polk. This guy would end up being the grandfather of a financier by the name of Lewis Polk Rutherford. Rutherford married a woman by the name of Janet Jennings Auchincloss.
Oh my gosh.
Who is the half-sister of Jackie Kennedy Onassis.
That's
a little bit of blue blood.
Connection. Yeah, that's a crazy connection.
So Frank goes to Columbia Law, serves on numerous New York City commissions. He's a counselor for the United States Department in Washington, D.C., and this is during World War I. Becomes the U.S. Undersecretary of State in 1919. What's going on in 1919 around the world? Treaty of Versailles.
Yep.
Treaty of Versailles. All these international bankers and lawyers are meeting in Paris to carve up the world for their corporate masters.
The Dulles brothers.
Indeed. Well, Davis and Polk are there. He becomes the acting Secretary of State in 1920. He actually headed the American Commission to negotiate peace in Paris in 1919.
And Robert Lansing, the uncle of the Dulles brothers, was the Secretary of State.
That he replaced.
Yeah.
Okay. 1924. He manages the failed Democratic presidential campaign of John W. Davis. Name of the law firm is Davis, Polk, and Wardwell. This is that Davis. So who is Davis? Well, he went to undergrad and law school at something called Washington and Lee University. So he didn't grow up as a blue blood. He became a West Virginia congressman from 1911 to 1913 and did a lot of work on the Clayton Antitrust Act of 1914. This is a big deal because it's right after Teddy Roosevelt had busted the trusts, allegedly, air quotes.
Yeah.
And what's going on here, the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890 had outlawed cartels. And what that did is it forced all these cartels to merge into these giant corporations. So they were no longer acting as cartels, they were acting as basically monopolies, which the Sherman Antitrust Act didn't address. So what the Clayton Antitrust Act attempted to do was to preempt some uncompetitive practices before they got started, like unilateral price discrimination. And they also gave regulators some supervision over all this M&A activity. So pretty important role to play. And we know how these corporations, all the multinational corporations they've become, they rule the world. And we know who sits on their boards and owns them. He becomes the U.S. Solicitor General from 1913 to 1918. That's the person who argues in front of the Supreme Court on behalf of the president. Then, Mr. Davis becomes the United States Ambassador to the United Kingdom, 1918 to 1921.
Which puts him in play in 1919 with the Treaty of Versailles. Mm-hmm. And for those of you who don't know this, one of the things that I learned in my research is the person that gets to be the ambassador to the UK is the most important U.S. ambassador anywhere, because they are coordinating all of the goings on collectively, because generally speaking, the U.S. does not do anything, especially at this point, without the UK in collaboration. And all of that is funneled through the ambassador to the UK. That is one of the most pivotal, besides the State Department, the Secretary of State, that is like the number 2 foreign policy person.
Yeah, we had a number of ambassadors of the UK that were in the Skull and Bones.
Correct.
Which tells you who's actually running our foreign policy. But
correct.
What the Colonel just said is really important. All that whole relationship between the U.S. and the UK really came about during the Gilded Age, when we were sending dollar princesses over to marry into the European families because they couldn't afford to keep up their estates, which is one of the reasons wealth doesn't last very long, many generations, is because you buy up these huge estates and then you got to pay millions of dollars a year just for the upkeep. So you need to marry a dollar princess. That's when the Fabian socialists came over to America, the Tavistock, all that stuff, Council of Foreign Relations, the Round Table. This is all going on there. This guy Davis is right in the middle of it.
Yep.
Okay. He comes back and becomes...
And he would have been a key role in the League of Nations.
Oh, without a doubt. I didn't get a mention of that, but that's a good call.
Yes.
The failed League of Nations.
Yeah. Well, failure in the stumbling upwards, the failure upwards to the UN.
And make no mistake, League of Nations and UN were, from their outset, a plan to get one world government.
Correct.
That's what it's always been about.
Correct.
Okay, so he becomes president of the New York Bar Association from 1931 to 33. Funny how that works. The Bar Association is pretty powerful, and this is New York, the most powerful.
Well, and we've seen demonstrated publicly currently how important bar associations are, because they were in the process of disbarring any lawyer that represented Trump.
Yeah.
It's a critical position.
Very much so. He would represent J.P. Morgan Jr. during the investigations into the causes of the Great Depression.
In other words, he was hiding the causes of it.
He would challenge a whole bunch of FDR's New Deal legislation. He lost most of them, but won a few. He unsuccessfully defended the separate but equal clause doctrine in Briggs versus Elliott in 1952, which led to the 1954 Brown versus Board of Education decision, which gave us desegregation, I should say. So very prominent lawyer. One last note on him. His cousin was a guy by the name of Cyrus Vance. That would be Carter's Secretary of State. Yeah. Cyrus Vance lost his father at a young age, and he moved in with Davis, and Davis pretty much raised him.
That's interesting.
Mm-hmm. Anything exciting ever happened with Cyrus Vance was Secretary of State for Carter?
Just a few things.
Just a few.
I did want to mention here that it says that he owned a home on Boca Grande, Florida. For those of you who don't know and are not from Florida, Boca Grande has a really, really interesting history. And just recently it was in the news, but it's kind of like the Jekyll Island of Florida. All of these very, very, very rich people from the Northeast, absentee landlords, bought up property on Boca Grande. And then what they did was they bought local representatives that eliminated all of the public parking because it's a free beach. It's the whole island, you have access to all of the beach because that's the law in Florida. But what they did to get around that so that they didn't have normal people on their beaches in front of their beach homes is that they eliminated all of the public parking in Boca Grande. So you can't actually drive downtown to get access to the beaches, which are just co-located there. And so they work in very nefarious ways to get what they want through the buying up of politicians. It's just a replication of what we see at the national level, but I just wanted to mention that.
That's some good color. Thank you. All right, so now we know about Polk and Davis. Before we jump into Mr. Wardwell, I just want to do a rehash. We talked about this when we did Charles Bonesman, Charles Spofford, but let's really highlight how important this law firm is. They were always the chief counsel for J.P. Morgan. They helped restructure the Pennsylvania Railroad. They helped create General Electric. Former President Grover Cleveland was a member of this law firm between his 2 terms of president. Fast forward to more recent, during the financial crisis of 2008 and 9, their clients included the Treasury Department, the Federal Bank of New York, AIG, Freddie Mac, Lehman Brothers, and my old employer, Citigroup.
Holy crap.
Davis Polk would help draft the Dodd-Frank Act. They were also one of the lead law firms telling law school deans that targeting Jewish students would have hiring consequences. That's just happened. And they've got some pretty interesting alumni of this law firm. Mueller special counsel team got the name of Yuzo Asanye. Federal Trade Commissioner John Leibowitz. They've had 3 chairmen of the SEC. So your law firm is representing some of the biggest publicly traded companies in the world, and a lot of your alumni are chairmen of the SEC.
That's significant.
Yeah. How about Kirsten Gillibrand worked for this law firm? Jerome Powell, chairman of the Fed. Anyone else exciting? Charles Lee, former CEO of the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. And the last name on there that's interesting is Andrew Yang.
Very interesting alumni.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd say that probably makes the top 3 of most prominent law firms in American history. And 2 of them were almost classmates of Scroll and Key. So you notice we don't have a picture of Alan Wardwell. I looked everywhere. I can't find one. So I just noticed it says Davis Polk is now what everyone calls it now. It used to be called Davis Polk Wardwell. So you think Wardwell kind of got forgotten. Doesn't have a picture. His name got taken off the firm name, right? So this guy's going to be a nobody. Well, that's what I thought at first until we did some diving into Mr. Wardwell.
There's probably a reason they're hiding him, right?
You tell me in a few minutes.
Okay.
He goes to Yale, then Harvard Law. He becomes a major in the American Red Cross in Russia.
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
Wait a minute. Okay. I thought I knew this name because the Red Cross mission to Russia was basically an intelligence operation that was completely fake. They had like 30 some people that went over there, and only like a handful, like a single handful, were actual doctors. The rest of them were all major businessmen like General Electric, JP Morgan, all of them. And the doctors, after a week, come back. They all stay over there. And basically, this was post Bolshevik Revolution. And they were basically scouting out all of that, working with the new Bolshevik communist government to electrify, set up railroads, and do everything else under the guise of a Red Cross mission. That Red Cross mission?
That one.
Okay.
And by the way, you got all of your facts straight there, so thank you. I'm going to go into more detail on what she just talked about here, because it is a fascinating. Crazy. It is a fascinating story. Yeah. Told you that's the first mic drop we're going to get to.
That's crazy.
So I've got 20 plus doctors and nurses and administrators. They sent millions of dollars in supplies. Historians suggest it was much of a political and business mission as humanitarian, just as the colonel just said. It's financed by American banking interests like JP Morgan and National Citibank. Isn't that same Citibank that this law firm represents? Yeah.
Same one.
So these business leaders were meeting with the Bolshevik leaders, and I'm going to go through a few of them. They kind of hoped they could stabilize Russia and preserve American business interests. The head of the mission was a guy, and that's air quotes on head of the mission. It was a guy by the name of Raymond Robbins, and he's a reformer who would meet personally with Lenin and Trotsky and would come back and argue for U.S. recognition of the Soviet Union. So he was not a business guy, but everyone else there was. I got a name of a guy by the name of William Boyce Thompson. He would become the director of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. He was also going to be a partner at JP Morgan. Anthony Sutton writes about Boyce Thompson and says he gave a ton of money to the Bolsheviks. Some historians dispute that. I generally believe that Anthony Sutton got most of his information correct.
I do too.
Next businessman we have is a guy by the name of Charles R. Crane. He had oil interests all over Eastern Europe. President Taft, Skull and Bones, had appointed him as the minister to China in 1909, but he got recalled before even setting sail for China because Philander Knox, the Secretary of State, held him personally responsible for the Chicago newspaper articles that were criticizing recent U.S. treaties with Japan and China. But Crane still gets sent on this trip. He's also the guy that helped finance the first oil explorations in both Saudi Arabia and Yemen. And of course, he's a member of the Jekyll Island Club. Another guy that was there was a guy by the name of John R. Mott. Why do we know him? Oh, he's the YMCA leader. How many times have we seen the YMCA involved in shenanigans?
And note that Raymond Robinson, the leader of the group, was also involved in, as well as the Red Cross, in the YMCA as well.
Yeah. Remember, we always talk about these things under the guise of charity?
Christianity.
To make it seem like, yeah.
It's the Young Men Christian Association.
Mm-hmm. Okay. In the middle of 2018, the Red Cross mission collapses. As the colonel said, these guys stay behind, and the U.S. government support shifted towards supporting the White Russians fighting the Bolsheviks, at least for a while.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Based on my research, I'm not even sure that was true. There seems to be a school of thought that our engagement with the White Russians was basically to undermine their movement, to ensure the Bolsheviks end up winning.
Yeah, I don't know if history's given us some very accurate portrayals of that period of time.
Yes.
It's just the two different versions are so they contrast so much. It's almost hard, it's hard to know what's real on that one.
Yes.
So back to Wardwell. His specialty in law was, of course, banking and international finance law.
Surprise.
Just like the Dulles brothers, who he was hanging out with in Paris. Okay, he becomes, later on, the vice president of the American-Russian Chamber of Commerce in 1929.
Okay, and so let me just say this. In my research, these Chamber of Commerce, there's a reason why under the National Endowment for Democracy, there was a slush fund set up for Chamber of Commerce. The Chamber of Commerce, and also, by the way, just so that you guys know, James Jesus Angleton's dad in Italy during World War II was the U.S. Italian Chamber of Commerce guy. These are critical roles in manipulating the economies of these countries and the integration of American concessions into these countries. This is a huge role that most people don't even understand.
Yeah, that's how we carve out these trade deals, which basically we then use to put pressure on foreign governments.
Yes.
And if they don't do what we say, you know, we take them to international courts. When I start talking about the ISDS settlements, and when that doesn't work, well, then the NGOs get there and we've got our regime change.
Correct.
All righty. More about Wardwell, the guy who doesn't even deserve a picture. He's an active member of the Society for Control of Cancer, which he got started because he procured a $100,000 gift from none other than John D. Rockefeller.
Wait a minute. So the guy that's going to control medicine is funding cancer? Okay, all right. I'm sure that's nothing.
Do I have to do one of my FDA rants, or can I save that for another time?
No, you can say that.
I just did that one on Sunday night. It was a pretty good rant too. His next little item. He accompanies someone by the name of W. Averill Harriman in his mission to Moscow in 1941.
Yes.
Harriman, of course,
stolen. What's going on in 41?
I believe World War II.
Okay.
Yeah. He then heads something called the Russian War Relief Incorporated, RWR. He goes there in 1942 during the war. RWR is a Soviet front with ties to Soviet intelligence. Before I tell this last part, when he gets back from the war, he becomes president of the New York City Bar Association. But I want to leave this. I want to end this with this part about the RWR.
Okay.
This is Wardwell leading this. So one of the people who was a part of this Russian war relief is a guy by the name of Savile Sachs. Savile Sachs gets introduced to Soviet agents by his mother, Bluma, who worked for the RWR. Sachs has a roommate by the name of Theodore Hall. Theodore Hall worked on the Manhattan Project. Sachs recruits Hall for the Soviets, and Hall's the one who gives the Soviets detailed description of the Fat Man plutonium bond and told them several processes for purifying plutonium.
Yep.
That's how the Soviets got their kickstart in the nuclear arms race, was thanks to Mr. Wardwell and his friends.
So, to carry this forward, he is the guy that goes over and without the financial propping up and Warburg was part of that as well, because he went over and ended up as part of the banking in the newly created Soviet Union. He did their international part. So you have the guy that leads the mission over to prop up financially, economically, and build out the new Soviet Union. who, after the Bolshevik Revolution, you have him then tied into World War One. You have him tied into World War Two, and you almost get the impression, as Anthony Sutton said, that Wall Street and the City of London gave us the left version of the boogeyman of the Soviet Union.
Wasn't
so
it Warburg also?
Sure.
Yeah, wasn't it Warburg also who financed Trotsky's trip back to the Soviet Union or to Russia from New York?
So there were several funders. Roosevelt or Rockefeller was involved in that as well. But yes, it was the New York City. They put him up in a very expensive apartment with a refrigerator, a driver, and air conditioning, which no one had at the time. He had no income. He was writing some few articles, no income commiserate with his living standards. They put him on a ship to Canada where they tried to hold him, but he finally gets out of there and he makes the trip over where the City of London was holding Lenin, and they were housing him like Trotsky, and they go in at the end and set up the Soviet Union. So
and they arrived the same week as the Red Cross.
Yes.
And wasn't it Woodrow Wilson who intervened with the Canadians to get Trotsky released?
Yes, it was. And so you see building, which now you know why there's no picture of him. This guy was critical on the unseen hand orchestrating what is going to be used for the next 50-some, 60-some years as the big evil boogeyman, to manipulate the strategy of tension around the world to be able to, for these same people, the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, to exploit the entire world.
That's pretty much the story we've been telling right there. Thought you might enjoy this one.
That's crazy.
We've got a couple of other Scroll and Key alumni from the 1890s. We don't have time for them today because each of these deserves their own show. First one is a William Adams Delano. When you talk about the Delanos, you've got to talk about the Roosevelts. So I want to spend an entire day, an entire show on the Delano Roosevelts because I've got some Roosevelt corruption stories you're going to love. But we also have Cornelius Vanderbilt III.
Yeah, those are definitely their own.
We've been promising a Vanderbilt show. We've been hinting at it for weeks now. So I think we should do something fun. Why don't you go into X, Twitter, and put out a poll and say, which one do you want to see first, the Roosevelts or the Vanderbilts?
Okay.
If we can do that after the show today, give it 24 hours, then we'll do it that way. How's it?
Okay, that sounds good.
Because those are both going to be a blast. Scroll and Keys might take us longer than we expected.
And it might morph into something other than some academic think tank.
I think it started doing that just now. And, it's interesting, but this goes back to what we talked about last week. It really is just an academic think tank until some mysterious benefactor builds this tomb, and then it starts getting more prominent. And you start getting some real names, and it becomes, a legitimate contender. It's not quite Skull and Bones level here yet. No. And Skull and Bones has been at this game for 5 decades before these guys get involved.
Yeah.
But we are getting some interesting names, and it's tying back to the same darn stories we've been telling.
Correct.
I still want to know
who funded it, the tomb. Well, but does that go to the secret part of secret societies? Because once you have the mechanism of the secret part, what happens in that tomb, then you're able to control people, and the controlled people are able to do much more nefarious things.
Yeah, I have a feeling that Scroll and Key really was started out for the right reasons, and it somehow got hijacked down through the decades. Because as we'll see going forward, there's more names and more additions to this story.
Yeah, see, I'm much more cynical than you are now. I think they were just building a Praetorian guard in the academics to do the exact same thing. But once they were able to begin compromising the people, then it shifts into something that expands. But that's just my opinion. And I'm much more jaded at this point.
Well, you've been known to be right from time to time.
From time to time.
From time to time. Well, this is a fun show. As researching this, I was getting a little bit giddy. I go, oh, this is gonna be more fun than I thought.
Yeah, researching is fun. It's addictive too.
Oh yeah, yeah. But this one was neat because you had to go way beyond Wikipedia. I mean, this guy Wardwell. If you look at his Wikipedia page, it's basically
this big.
It's like 2 paragraphs.
Yeah.
But you go digging a little bit deep.
Yeah, and that's the crazy thing, and that's the reason why I started using the index. I don't even bother with Wikipedia anymore. Like you said, it is a good launching board to give you the skeleton of someone, but if you don't have other research tools, there's a reason why Wikipedia is there, to make you intellectually lazy.
Well, you also anytime you read something on Wikipedia, you need to have a second source. You don't stay to this fact because they even contradict themselves. You have 2 different people contributing to the. There's all kinds of reasons Wikipedia sucks, but it is still very useful.
Yes, as a springboard.
Mm-hmm. Same thing with AI. AI is a wonderful shortcut to search engines. Better double check it because if you don't know what you're doing, AI will tell you lies.
Gab AI tells a lot of lies.
Does it? I haven't been using Gab. I was going to check that out though, but I will do that soon.
Well, what I do is anytime I use one, I use 3, and I have the other ones fact check each other. And I
like the ones who list
consensus.
I like the ones who list their sources. I got some other sources I'll share with you at some point. Like I've got the ability to dig up old newspaper articles. That's a subscription site, but digging up old newspaper articles and I'm going really deep. What's better than finding the people what they were saying at the time rather than historians talking about it 50 years later?
Good and bad, because if you use the newspaper articles at the time, you're going to catch the New York Times and the Washington Post spin. But generally speaking, if you go a few months after something significant happened, you're going to see them in an article buried on the 7th page actually tell the truth.
Leslie Bayer, Mama Bayer, in the chat says Wardwell was in the news just 2 days ago. I'm not familiar with that. If you don't mind finding that story and linking it to the survey the Colonel is going to post on X, I would be very interested in seeing that, if you don't mind. Thank you. All right, shall we call it a day?
We should call it a day. Thanks, everybody.
Cheers, everyone. Thanks for watching.
Yeah, thanks, everybody, for joining us today. And the next 2 shows are going to be very interesting. Take care, everybody.